This article's from the Royal Museum's Greenwich, whatever that is. And it's titled, "Why Do We Have Special Names for Full Moons?" And it talks a little bit about the moon cycles, because I was kind of wondering, like, apparently each full moon has a name that's associated with it. Let's read it. What are the phases of the moon? It says, when we look up at the moon, we don't always see the same amount of its surface being lit up. This apparent change in the shape of the moon is known as its phase. Okay. What causes the phases of the moon? I almost want to skip this, but let's see what science tells us about the phases of the moon. Science is going to tell us that the phases of the moon are caused by the relative positions of the moon, sun, and earth. So it's weird, because I just wanted to learn about the special names of the full moon. So when Z Googles, like, why do different full moons have different names? Like, you have the harvest moon, the flower moon. Like, what is all that? I'm just trying to, like, find out, like, why do we have all these different names for the full moons? And of course, what do they have to do? They have to hit me with the propaganda first. They have to tell me that the phases of the moon are caused by the relative positions of the moon, sun, and earth. Which is funny, because I can't tell you how many globetards that I've argued with that have tried to tell me. Like when I had an argument, a debate or a dialogue with Scott 2B, when he over and over and over was trying to tell me that the phases of the moon are caused by Earth's shadow. And the guy, like, for an hour couldn't get past it. But no, guys, even popular science tries to tell us that it's the relative positions of the moon, sun, and earth. And that because the moon produces no visible light of its own, really? Anyway, let's continue. We can only see the parts of the moon that are lit up by other objects, i.e. the sun. A small amount of light comes from distant stars and the reflection of light from the earth, known as earthshine. Really? So science is telling me that a small amount of light come from distant stars? Give me a fucking break, people. And some from the reflection of light of the earth. However, the main source of light for the moon is the sun. Let's continue. At almost all times, half the moon is being lit up by the sun. But this need not be the half that is facing towards the earth. The only exception is during a lunar eclipse. Again, I just wanted to know, why are there different full moons? Why are they called different things? What do they mean? And they have to give me their propaganda first, because of course they can't just, give me what I want to hear anyway. If the moon is between the earth and the sun in its orbit, then the backside of the moon is being lit up and the side facing earth is in darkness. This is called a new moon. If the moon is on the other side of the earth compared to the sun, then the near side of the moon will only be the near side of the moon will be fully lit up. That's a full moon. Again, the stupid heliocentric model that makes no sense whatsoever. But anyway, let's continue. Here's the part where I really want to know. How many phases of the moon are there? In between these, the moon goes through multiple stages of partial illumination during its different phases. These are the banana-shaped crescent moon, the D-shaped quarter moon, which is kind of like half of a moon. I don't know why they call it like a half moon, like a quarter moon. Maybe because it's a quarter of the way through its like cycle. Anyway, let's continue. And the almost complete gibbous moon. Finally, each phase is also named after its position in the full 29.5 day cycle, based on whether it's growing, which is called waxing, or shrinking, which is called waning. Waxing and waning. So in reality, guys, the moon cycle is not 28 days. It's 29.5. Apparently, from full moon to full moon, full cycle is 29.5 days, which makes sense. I see Axis Rat Bloods here, and he was telling me about this before, that it's really 12 moons per year with like some days left over, which makes sense. There's really only 13 full moons in a solar year, in a solar cycle. Only every so often, like every 2.5 years. Let's continue, though. So thus the 8 phases of the moon. So you have the new moon, which is basically no moon. When there's like no fucking moon, that's a new moon. Then you have your waxing crescent, when you could first start to see that little sliver. Then you have your first quarter moon, which to me should be called a half moon, but they fucking call it a quarter moon because I think it's a quarter way through the full cycle. We're all learning here, guys. We all should know this, by the way, but many of us don't. Probably most of us. No, 29 is not a Mandela effect from the chicken. Get a hold of yourself. Then you have your waxing gibbous moon, which to me means it's like almost your full moon. Then you have your full moon. Yay, full moon. Then you have your waning gibbous moon. Then you have your last quarter moon. Then your waning crescent. Then back to your new moon. Apparently, this whole cycle from one phase to another, whatever it is 29.5 days. Then it says the full quarter and new moons are all the instants in time when the moon is exactly fully half or not at all illuminated from our perspective. Again, more propaganda. Anyway. How are the phases of the moon and the months linked? Yeah, this is what Z wants to know. The moon's phases and the months of the year are inextricably linked. Okay. Well, why did they fuck with it then? Let's continue. It takes the moon about 29.5 days to go through all of its phases, meaning that each month has an average one full moon. This figure is not the same as the time it takes the moon to orbit the Earth, which is 27.3 days. All right, so interestingly enough, you're telling me that the cycles of the moon cycle is 29.5 days, but that the time it takes the moon to orbit the Earth is 27.3 days, which is a little bit more than 2 days less. Why is that different? Why is the orbit cycle more than 2 days less than the phase of the moon cycle? I don't know. Maybe I'll have to look into that more. Because you're just telling me that the moon orbits the Earth. You're just saying it. You never really prove it. Meaning to say, guys, we can prove the phases of the moon. We can prove that it takes 29.5 or 29.53 days to go from full moon to full moon. I got that. But try to prove to me that it takes 27.3 days for the moon to orbit the Earth. I'd like to see it. Anyway, let me continue. Let's keep going. How many full moons are in a month? Because our modern calendar isn't quite in line with the moon's phases. Do you think? It's what I've been saying over and over again. Sometimes we get more than one full moon in a month, which is sometimes known as a blue moon. Again, to me, that's totally false, guys. You can't have 2 full moons in a month because a month goes around the moon cycle. At least that's the way it's supposed to be. How many full moons are there in a year? There are 12 full moon names corresponding to the full moon in each month. But sometimes there are more than 12 full moons in a year. So I guess that's where I was getting confused, because on most years there's 12 full moons within the lunar cycle. I mean the sun cycle. But occasionally there's 13, depending on how it falls. Full moon names and meanings. Over time, different cultures have given names to full moons across the lunar cycle. Many of the moon's nicknames have come to us from the Native American culture, etc., etc., etc. Which is interesting because that would make that very specific to like America, you know? And I realized like all these full moons seem to be around like Native American culture or the early American settlers. So why are these the names? Like, do Europeans call the moons different names? And then what about people in the quote-unquote southern hemisphere? What do they call their moons? Because everything's fucking opposite for them. Anyway, so I do see some bias here with the colonial Americans and the Native Americans. Anyway, let's go into it. The January moon's called the wolf moon. All right, that makes sense to me. Howling of hungry wolves, lamenting the scarcity of food in midwinter. Okay. The February moon's the snow moon. I think we could all understand why that would be. The March moon is apparently the worm moon. Apparently, there's a bunch of worms come out at that time. The April moon's pink moon, which is one of my favorite moons. I just like the name Pink Moon. Apparently, that's because pink flowers blossom that time of year. Hmm. The May moon's apparently the flower moon because that's when the flowers are in full blossom and they're in abundance. June's the strawberry moon because that's when you harvest strawberries. July's the buck moon. Apparently, that's when the male deer grow their antlers each year. They begin to grow them back in the buck moon. August is the sturgeon moon. Apparently, that's when the sturgeon species of fish start to appear. September is the famous corn moon, or otherwise known as the harvest moon. Hard Hitting says, I thought the moon was on 19-year cycles. No, dude. The eclipse, the lunar eclipse, is a 19-year cycle. But the lunar cycle is just, like we're saying, dude, it's 29.5 days, bro. That 19-year cycle you're talking about is the eclipse cycle, bro. So, yeah, the corn moon's in September, which is often the harvest moon. October is the hunter's moon. That tells you. I mean, look near me, guys. That's when you'll see people start to hunt. Hunting season begins. That's when many hunters prefer to hunt the summer fattened deer. Also, I think the deer start going into heat, so you'll see the bucks are on the move. The deer once October and November hit, the deer start to move around because I'm pretty sure it's their mating season. So they're cruising around, They're just not kind of just chilling in their little area. It's a good time to hunt. Plus, it says they're fattened up, which makes sense. They've eaten all year. Now it's time for them to do their mating and stuff. November's called the beaver moon. And apparently not because that's when people eat beavers. If you're like me, you just don't eat beaver. Apparently that's when the beavers become active and stuff. And December's the cold moon. But I finally found out what a true blue moon is, because the blue moon they tell us doesn't make sense. They say a blue moon is when you have two full moons in the same month, but the months are completely arbitrary. But now I finally found out, at least if I'm to believe this, what a true blue moon is. It's when I'll read it. It says the moon completes 12 full cycles of its phases in about 354 days, which makes sense, which is 11 days short of a calendar year. Every 2.5 years or so, the difference adds up to an extra 13th full moon occurring during the year. And this relatively rare occurrence is sometimes referred to as a blue moon. That makes more sense to me, guys. That if most solar cycles, which is a year from solstice to solstice, I get that, you get 12 full moons. But occasionally there's 13. That makes sense to me. That's the blue moon. Okay, I'm going to go with it. Until somebody tells me different, that's the blue moon. I'm fucking tired of the bullshit. Oh, 2 full moons in the same month. Well, if you give me a 31-day arbitrary month when you tell me it's really 29.5 days, well, of course sometimes there's going to be 2, and you can't say that's a blue moon. You just made it up. All right. I don't need to get excited. I don't need to scream at everybody. Everybody relax. We finally found out what a real blue moon is. It's when there's 13 every so often. Okay. I don't need to do the high-pitched screaming, everybody. Calm down. Calm down. And then finally, what is the harvest moon? The harvest moon is the one that most people are familiar with, and it refers to the nearest full moon to the autumnal equinox, which usually takes place at the end of September. All right. Which is typically the corn moon. Maybe sometimes it's the hunter's moon, or maybe it's even the sturgeon moon in August. But it's typically that corn moon in September. Okay, everybody? Now we know. Now we know that it's really a 354-day cycle, which would leave 11 days left over.